Hello and welcome to the Garden of the Black Roses. This is fanfiction. This is the next chapter of my Ragnarok Online Fanfiction. Now, just to put into perspective, this chapter onwards, you'll probably notice it will become more Chibi-centric, because at the time of writing chapter 21, the Ara Revolution server that I was on was wiped, reborn, then dropped. I think it just kind of disappeared. So I focused more on Chibi because she was my character, and it was easier to write the story from that point onwards. So yeah. Also, I was writing the Adventures of the Iron Wolves, so one of my original pieces at this time. So Chibi and Lack actually take on similar personalities to Anima and Styx in Iron Wolves Alpha. Alright. So yeah. Chapter 1. No, not Chapter 1. Chapter 21! Jeez. Not going back to the beginning. Chapter 21. I thought you guys were never gonna come back, Phenomenon exclaimed, watching them step out of the warp portal Lack had cast. It had been incredibly silent. It's kind of scary being here alone. Chibi knelt and gave him a pat on his head, and then took his hands. Poor boy, she teased, and placed a pair of knuckles on his hands. A gift from me to you. They won't disappear when you switch from High Priest to Champion, and you can use them with Millionaire. Phenomenon looked at one and raised an eyebrow. There's a few surprises in them. You'll see during our battle. As if on cue, Rena appeared, growing from the shadow of a tree. We're in trouble, guys. Lady Deathstrike gave Chibi a small smile. Lack decided to give Chibi a really long lecture on hiding information when this was all over. Rena ignored all the interplay and continued. I'll take you there. Everyone take a hold of one of my arms, and don't let go. She warped them into Loki's castle. This is getting nowhere! This is getting us nowhere! Micrax cried, thrusting his poleaxe into a blue gem. Looking around, he saw Rena come through the shadow near the door. Finally! Lack, these guys are difficult. No matter how many blue gems we smash, they won't die. Chibi peeked out from behind Lack and looked at the doppelgangers. Lady Deathstrike stood on Lack's other side and looked at the doppelgangers as well. Chibi lifted her head and whispered in his ear, Use your knuckles. Cast a Sure Strike and try and hit the doppelganger in the chest. Dead center. Lady Deathstrike added softly, Don't miss. Lack gave them both a dirty look and prepared a Sure Strike. Lady Deathstrike relayed the same information to Phenomenon, who did the same. Mike Rex and John Flora kept one doppelganger in one spot. Lack stepped up and focused. Pooling all of his power, he cast a Sure Strike. Lack's Assura Strike exploded, not only knocking down the doppelganger, but from the combination of 4 elements being forced into the doppelganger, caused blue gems to shower everyone in the room. Lack stared, shaking at where the doppelganger was. Running over to Chibi, he shook her hard. What the hell was that? You knew that was going to happen, didn't you? His back got pelted with blue gems as Phenomenon got rid of another doppelganger. His grip hardened on Chibi's shoulders, as his anger began to rise. "Explain now. Everything." Chibi heard the danger note in Lak's voice that she always heard when he got to his breaking point. "The knuckles I gave you and Fen have the basic 4 elements. When you put those 4 together, like as in using them with an attack like a sure strike, it causes those elements to force each other away, causing an explosion." Lak's grip on her shoulders didn't listen. Chibi wondered if there was something else he wanted to know, because she explained the knuckles. "And earlier," Lak said, his voice still dangerous. Being showered with blue gems for the second time as Phenomenon dealt with the last doppelganger in the room didn't help soothe his anger. "When we were at the Alchemist Society, you knew Rena was going to come to us and bring us here." "Ah," Chibi thought, looking towards Lady Deathstrike with a "help me" expression. He doesn't know about Ear and everything to do with Azoth. It'll take too long to explain all that to him. Tadakono put a hand on Lak's left hand, and Lady Deathstrike took his right hand. They pulled him away from Chibi. "There's time to explain things, and the reason for me to know that is too long to tell now." Chibi straightened her cape, ignoring Lak's angry growl. Mike Rex coughed, and his brother began to heal Balois. Rena stood between Lak and Chibi. "She's right. There's more doppelgangers outside, and if we don't organize ourselves, we'll all be in deep trouble." She backed away a little from Lak's angry stare. "You can take your anger out on Chibi later." She looked back at Chibi and added, "Right?" Chibi walked away and walked over to Mike Rex. She held out her hand and he placed her Azoth carefully there. She tucked her Azoth into the loop on her belt. "We can't rely on a sure strike. These doppelgangers are created solely with blue gems. It'll be difficult to destroy them." She walked over to the door and touched it. She could feel the doppelgangers on the other side. Spinning, she stared at Lak. "Move away," she said in a very dominating tone. Lak growled and came at her instead. "Loki's coming. Unless you want to kill your support, you better start paying attention." The corner where Lak had been standing shimmered. Loki appeared and smiled at all of them. "I see you can defeat my doppelgangers then." He summoned monsters they hadn't seen before. "Let's see if the power of the tower is a match for you all." Mike Rex leveled his poleaxe and blocked a Retribution's attack. Its speed matched his perfectly. John Flora supported his brother quickly. Lady Deathstrike forced a Solace into a corner, her critical attacks not always hitting. Phenomenon changed to a high priest and supported her. Tadakono and Rena tag-teamed against an observation, using their Vitata clips to support each other. Balois pushed a shelter to the wall and kept it there. Lak, torn between helping Chibi and helping Balois, attempted to get Chibi to a more supporting position. Before Chibi stood 4 beasts. She knew their names and abilities. Their eyes stared at her. "Thanatos Odium," Chibi began, causing all the monsters in the room to freeze at her voice. "Thanatos Dolor, Thanatos Despero, and Thanatos Maero. Guardians of the Thanatos Tower and protectors of the memory of Thanatos, hear my words. Remove these monsters from my sight. If you refuse, May you be destroyed and sealed within the depths of Yggdrasil. The 4 monsters growled at her, not moving an inch from their spot. Lack rested a hand on Chibi's shoulder and whispered, "Have you gone nuts? If these monsters are from Thanatos Tower, saying that will anger them." Chibi could feel his anger had cooled because of his surprise. "I know how to deal with these guys," Chibi replied, stepping forwards towards them. The 4 stepped back, away from her. "Until I explain everything to you, don't question what I'm doing." Lack followed her and replied, "Ea has told me about everything to do with Azoth. You don't need to explain much to me now." Chibi continued forwards. The monsters that were attacking everyone moved to attack Chibi. Their loyalty to the Guardians of Thanatos Tower created a desire to protect them against this unknown threat. "Chibi?" She said nothing, and continued until the 4 were against the wall. "Answer me. As container of pieces of Thanatos, my will overrides yours. I can send you to the deepest pits of hell if you refuse me." Thanatos Maera raised a hand and caused the lesser monsters to freeze on the spot. It nodded at Chibi, and the 4 knelt before her. She relaxed and sighed. The sound of a soft breeze flowed through the room. She listened carefully. "You wish to protect me against Loki? He's the one that summoned you all." Listening to the silent voices of the 4, she replied, "I understand. I accept your proposal. I also add a condition of my own. Do not harm anyone in this room. Protect them as best you can." They nodded and stood, waiting for instructions. Micrex and Lack took a hold of Chibi's shoulders. They could feel demonic magic flowing from her. "Chibi," Lack began, and stopped when she raised her hand. "You know that Ea used the 4 pieces of Thanatos Tower to heal me after I warped Azoth," Chibi replied, adding the extra information so Micrex could follow. "The monsters of Thanatos Tower cannot lay a finger on me without suffering at the hands of the combined power of those pieces within me." She looked at him, her eyes flecked with red. "I'm purely demonic in nature now, until my spiritual power heals. With that said, I can't be healed." Glancing at Tadakono, she added, "Or be resurrected. The holy magic from those things hurt too much." Lack sighed, seeing he had no choice. He turned to Phenomenon and asked, "Can you stay as support with John?" He glanced at Chibi. "There's holy magic in your potions too, so that means you can't support either." Chibi nodded and listened, waiting while everyone planned their attack strategy against the doppelgangers outside. Loki raged angrily at the sight of his summoned monsters following Chibi's orders in his mirror. "How is that possible?" he cried, throwing a dagger at the mirror, causing it to shatter. "She has pieces of Thanatos? How could I not sense those within her?" Hel shook her head. In the corner of her eye she saw a flash of silver and black. "There's someone else in the castle." She got up and went to her bedroom. "I wonder who?" She touched the mirror above her dressing table. It misted over, then cleared to reveal a silver Lord Knight and a black assassin cross running down the hall towards the room with Lack and the others. Brotherhood? When did they return? I don't wish to be here now. Father will surely lose now that they have enough strength to gather to defeat him. She packed her bags, picked up Morgu's sleeping head, and disappeared. "I hope they're still alright," the Silver Lord Knight said to the Black Assassin Cross. Tia was worried. He said he couldn't feel Lack's presence within Rune Midgard anymore. "This place isn't exactly in Rune Midgard, is it?" The Assassin Cross replied, drawing her jaws to the sound of fighting ahead. She and the Lord Knight leapt and together brought down a doppelganger. They looked up, confused at the sight before them. Chibi sat down hard, holding her arm where a doppelganger had cut her. The 4 guardians stood in a ring around her. The lesser monsters had disappeared, being too weak to fight against the combined might of doppelgangers. A shower of blue gems caused her to look up. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Lack!" she cried, staring at the pair who were staring right back at her. Lack, who was occupied with a doppelganger before him, looked briefly at Chibi, then at the direction she was looking. Casting a sure strike on the doppelganger, he leapt into the ring and stood next to Chibi, replenishing his magical power. While he replenished his magical power. He smiled and extended his hand towards his old friend. "Iswal, when did you get back to Rune Midgard? I heard that you and Kei-chan were exploring the outer world together." "We did," Kei-chan said in a miffed voice. Iswal shook Lack's hand strongly. "Tia asked us to return and told us to come straight here." She looked at the 4 guardians, then at Chibi, then finally at Lack. "Things have really changed here." We'll talk and explain later," Lack replied, looking towards the remaining doppelgangers. "But for now—" "We understand," Aswal replied. Iswal replied, letting go of Lack's hand and taking Kei-chan's. "Let's go." Together they leapt into battle. Lack crouched down near Chibi and whispered, "Will you be alright?" Before Chibi could answer, Thanatos Despero patted his shoulder. He could hear its voice whisper in his head. Chibi drew out her embryo and summoned her leaf, which began to heal her. Holy magic? Chibi shook her head. "My leaf directly responds to my spiritual power." She let its power wash over her. Therefore, its heal isn't purely holy. She noticed his concerned expression. "I'll be alright. Get in there and do some damage. We'll catch up soon." Kei-chan stabbed a doppelganger with the point of her jaw and cast Soul Breaker right into its body. Iswal jumped over her and swung his poleaxe around, slicing its head off completely. Kei-chan backflipped away from the explosion of the blue gems and landed near Chibi to give her a wink before leaping at another doppelganger. She wanted to give Chibi a little greeting at least, because they were old friends. "How many left?" Lady Deathstrike asked, breathing hard. Phenomenon cast Heal on her, and echoed her question with his own sigh. "This is really endless," she cried, and swiped at a doppelganger, missing it by an inch. "Just 5 left," Balois replied, shooting one in the throat, causing it to explode. "Make that 4. A blue streak flew past him, causing him to spin in circles before renewing his attack. Lack spun, and had just enough time to leap back away from a doppelganger's blade. Chibi leapt to where he was standing and locked blades with it, her eyes both dark and menacing. From just looking at her, Lack felt she was a cat with its fur standing on end. Her leaf healed him, and it pointed to a bottle hanging from her belt. "You want me to take it?" It nodded, and mimed throwing it at the doppelganger. Chibi let out a shriek and forced the doppelganger backwards so it fell over. Lack stared at her in surprise. He had never seen her fight with that much intensity before. Her leaf poked him and pointed at the bottle again, before darting off quickly to heal Chibi. "Are you going to take it or what?" Chibi yelled, spinning and locking swords with the doppelganger again. The bottle swung on her belt. Lack sighed and came closer to her, taking the bottle and throwing it at the doppelganger. Chibi jumped up and cut the bottle in half, spilling the contents over the doppelganger. "Lack!" She locked swords again with the doppelganger. He leapt over her and cast a Shura strike, knocking down the doppelganger. It exploded into potions that looked exactly like the one Lack had thrown. Microx, getting the idea, smashed a bottle that was flying over a doppelganger, then brought his poleaxe down hard, slicing it in half. He backed up with his back against Iswell. "I get what Chibi did. The potions contain a substance that unravels doppelgangers. She made it to help us make quick work of them." "We just smash bottles then," Kei-chan replied, bringing her jaws through 2 bottles near her. "Let's make these 2 into none." The liquid from the bottle sprinkled over the remaining doppelgangers. She cast Meteor Strike, catching them both. Spinning, she sliced both through the waist, then down the middle. "That's all of them," she said, with a smile as they exploded into blue gems. Lack tapped Chibi's shoulder, still feeling her demonic aura very strongly. The 4 guardians shook with fear behind her. "What's wrong?" Her aura intensified, and he backed away, his holy aura trying to suppress her demonic one. "Chibi, if there's something coming, then tell me." Chibi's leaf shivered. It opened its mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Frustrated, it pulled at Lack's clothes. It squeezed its eyes shut and tried to talk. Lack looked worriedly at it. Microx and Iswell came close to Lack. "What's going on?" "I'm not sure," Lack replied, watching Chibi's leaf try to talk. "All I can gather is that..." He paused as the air near Chibi rippled. Ia appeared and placed a hand on Chibi's head. Her leaf relaxed and leaned against Lack, its mouth still moving as if to explain what was going on. "Relax now, Chibi," Ia whispered in her ear. "Feeding anger to the pieces doesn't help you." She felt Lack standing near her. "I'm going to take Chibi away from here. It's affecting her more than it should." He nodded, and Ia took a hold of Chibi and left. Her leaf floated around Lack and touched his cheek. The 4 guardians disappeared also. "Looks like she told me to stay with you," it said to him. Lack stared at it. "When I touched your cheek, I linked myself to your spiritual power. Because yours is so immense, I temporarily have my ability to speak." "So what happened just then?" he asked, watching Microx gather everyone to him and start replanning their attack strategy. All I could get was Chibi's aura was increasing. "Her spiritual power used to be almost equal to yours. While the differences in your physical strengths are different, as they should be, the amount of life and spiritual power you both hold are almost the same. it explained, floating around happily. After Chibi created Azoth and warped it, they both decreased to a level that made it difficult for her to fight like she used to. To compensate the loss, the pieces made up a large portion of her power. While it's unusable, if Chibi reaches her breaking point, she can't control the demonic power of the pieces. The more anger she feeds them, the more uncontrollable they become. That's why Ia took her away. She was worried about the pieces taking over.
Right then! Lak walked over and gave Kei-chan a slap on the back. Where are we going now? Chapter 22. Kei-chan gave him a slap back and smiled. We can't seem to decide. I think our priority should be Loki, but Mike wants to rescue Momo. She watched the leaf fly around behind Lak before continuing. If we divide our power, then defeating Loki will be difficult, as well as rescuing Momo. Well, Lak said deep in thought, if we defeat Loki, his power over Momo should break as well, shouldn't it? Mike Rex nodded stiffly. Lady Deathstrike and Balois gave him a sneaky smile. Then our priority is simple. Defeat Loki. He pulled his gloves tight and settled the knuckles to sit properly. The question we should be asking is how are we going to defeat him? Loki is a god, and we're all only human. Yay, Kei-chan said with sarcasm. Trust you to point out our biggest flaw. What about the other gods? Like Tia? She glanced at Lak and Phenomenon. Or Ia? She looked at Tadakono. Or even Jord? She looked at Lady Deathstrike, then sighed. Ia's definitely out of the question, Tadakono replied, blinking. She's with Chibi at the moment, and probably won't leave her side for a while. Tia... Phenomenon glanced at Lak, who nodded. Tia might come, but I don't know what he can do. All I know is that he granted a dual-class ability to Lak and myself. Jord's an earth goddess, Lady Deathstrike said softly. She won't be able to do much against Loki. The only ones who could probably deal with Loki are those who are patrons for war or justice. Thinking back to her talk with Chibi, she added, Fawcetti and Thor, perhaps? Though I have no idea how to call them. Try calling Tia, Iswal replied, leaning against Kei-chan. He may respond since both of you are here. I'm not going to even try Fawcetti. He's been in a bad mood ever since the mediators went missing. Closing their eyes, Lak and Phenomenon called out to Tia. I knew it was hopeless, Lak said after a while. He sighed and Phenomenon leaned back against a pole, also giving out a sigh. Tia was never one to answer to anyone's call. He'd just come when he felt like it. Looking at Iswal, he added, Just try Fawcetti. Just maybe he'll feel like letting off some steam by kicking Loki's ass. Use that proposition if you make contact with him. Iswal closed his eyes and held on to Kei-chan's hand for support. Mike Rex raised an eyebrow and then looked at Lak. I'm curious, why is it that the gods have favoured mostly Fight Club? It seems too much of an imbalance in power between the guilds. Coincidence? Lak replied, not completely listening. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because of the person themselves, and not the guild they were in. I mean, Ia favoured Chibi while she was in Velvet Touch of Inishi, and you can't say Lady Deathstrike and Iswal weren't favoured by their gods because they were in Fight Club. Mike Rex made a face, knowing full well Lack wasn't answering him seriously. It's just too much of a coincidence. Iswal's eyes snapped open. Mike Rex could tell he was shaking inside. What happened? Fawcetti told me not to bother him until we have Loki cornered, Iswal said in a level voice. I got yelled at. Kei-chan gave him a soft pat on the back. So basically he will come, but only after we corner Loki. At least that's better than nothing, Renna replied, looking around the room. Lack? Lack looked at Renna with a slightly dazed look. Yeah? She handed him a pouch with his name on it. I think Ia left this for you. I saw it appear just now. Lack opened the pouch, and inside were a few of Chivi's unraveling potions and her Azoth. You feeling all right? She asked, noticing he still looked dazed. Yeah, he replied, nicking himself with Azoth. Shaking his head, he added, just a little out of it at the moment. Tiredness, perhaps. He tucked Azoth into his belt and noticed Chibi's leaf staring at him with narrowed eyes. I'm all right. As all right as a dead pouring, it replied. Your life power and magical power are both low at the moment, yet you say you're all right. It perched itself on his shoulder and cast heal. Honestly, if Chibi were here, she would have smacked you silly just now. Kei-chan and Iswal smothered a laugh. Lack gave them a dirty look. Still casting heal, flight continued. Worked out who is going to be supporting? You're down one support. If you get Fen to support, you'll be down a fighter. However... It looked at Lady Deathstrike. If you use Dia, she can level her alchemist side to a creator, and you'll have a dual fighter/support. Sounds good, Lady Deathstrike said, nodding. Only one problem with it, though. Flight floated over and gave her 2 of Chibi's pouches. Ah, we have no problem now. Flight floated back to Lack and perched on his shoulder and recast heal. Lady Deathstrike turned into an alchemist and attached the pouches. Taking out a few blue potions, she pitched them at Lack. Flight motioned her hand, indicating to her that it wasn't quite full. She kept pitching until Flight held up her hand. My God, Lack! She exclaimed, peeking into the pouch. Your magical power is huge! I was wondering why this pouch was so heavy. There's mainly condensed whites and blue potions. Lack gave her a wink. Chibs is always ready to support me. Opening a door, he added, Let's get this over and done with. I want to fix up Fight Club headquarters soon. Loki paced the floor, furious that Hell left without telling him. Just like her brother. Traitors, the lot of them. He sat down hard on his throne and thought carefully. I can't use the monsters of Thanatos because of Chibi. I can't use the master monsters because of Lack and Mike Rex being there. Am I already out of options? Not completely. Gemini stepped out into the room and smiled. There is a set of monsters you can use. Loki gave her an uninterested look. You can use the monsters that guard Odin's temple. No one has been able to set foot in there because of Valkyrie Rangris and the constant summoning of all the monsters in there. She leaned against his throne and smiled. Summon enough of them, and even Lack would be overwhelmed. I don't know, Loki replied, giving her a little tickle under her chin. I've observed Lack and Nephilim. Against hordes of those monsters, he can kill them all without breaking a sweat. The only time I've seen him under strain from being attacked was when he was fighting one of his own guildsmen. There's no way I can take the ones with him now, and I have no idea where the rest are. The mirror Chibi gave me that shows the depths of Fight Club show no one in its halls. But, Gemini said, purring slightly, even so, the monsters of Odin's temple are much stronger than simple Nephilim monsters. You can also send those who are too strong away, to somewhere they haven't been before. You mean like Nameless Island? Loki asked, ruffling her hair, then getting up to find a map. I could send them there. They'd be out of the way for a while. I hope it will give me time to rebuild my army. Not together, though. Gemini watched him. They'll get back here much faster if they're sent together. Of course. Loki tapped the outline of Nameless Island on the map. I knew that already. The door at the end of the room opened. Here they are. Chibi sat bolt upright and stared out towards a dark forest filled with the quietly floating Sohi. Where am I? Ia placed a hand on her head. Ia? Chibi looked at her through confused eyes. Where is this? Outskirts of Payon, Ia replied, stroking Chibi's hair. I had to move you from the battle because you were feeding your anger to the pieces. Noticing the change in Chibi's expression to concern, she asked, What's wrong? Did they defeat the doppelgangers? Chibi asked as her eyes darkened. She saw Lack fall through a silvery doorway and land on a jetty. He walked up to the houses ahead. Chibi recognized the place as Nameless Island. She shook her head and then at Ia. Has something happened to them? Forseti and Thor have gone to aid them just now, Ia replied, knowing Chibi saw something. You need me to relay something to them? She shook her head. Even if I was to say anything, I don't know if it will happen there or later on. She looked at Ia with clear eyes. I need to get back and make sure myself. Can you take me back? Ia sighed and nodded. Lack, Iswell, and Mike Rex first forced Loki into a corner. John Flora, supporting them to the best of his ability. Forseti and Thor stood behind them, preparing the bindings to hold Loki. You won't take me that easily. Light expanded from Loki, causing the four to fly backwards away from him. Kei-chan sat, with Lady Deathstrike, taking care of her sister Gemini, whom had her shard newly removed. Balawa switched his swords to immaterial and launched a new attack with Rena, Phenomenon, and Tadakono. Lack sat up, his vision slightly blurred after hitting the wall. A blue figure stood over him with its hands on its hips. Honestly, it said to him, your defenses are so bad at the moment. Anything troubling you? Not... His vision cleared and realized it was Chibi standing over him. Not really. Well, not now, anyway. He looked over and saw Micrax helping Iswell up. I thought Ia took you away. There's something I have to make sure you don't do, Chibi replied softly. I saw it again a few minutes ago. Lack gave her a confused look. Just trust me on this. It will fare badly for you if it happens. Barlois and Rena hit the wall near them. Lack stood and gave Chibi a pat before nodding to Micrax and Iswell. Loki noticed Chibi's reappearance and decided the time was right. He advanced upon the three guild masters, his hands crackling with power. Chibi cast alchemical coating on the three and stood as their support. In the corner of her eye, she could see Tadakono casting Resurrect on John Flora. "Away you go!" Loki cried, calling a big gust of wind and directing it towards the guild masters. Lack raised his arms to shield his face against the wind. Iswell and Micrax held their poleaxes in front of them as a shield, with one hand and the other to shield their face. Chibi drew her sword and stabbed it into the ground. She put her back to the wind and crouched down. She could feel an alchemical reaction nearby. She noticed her leaf, taking shelter with her. She whispered in its ear, "A silvery doorway is going to open up. I want you to stay with Lack. Support him as best you can." It nodded, and flew with difficulty to take a hold of the hood of Lack's shirt. Loki increased the ferocity of the wind, forcing them backwards. Lack lost his footing and flew backwards but towards the silvery doorway. Chibi looked up, her eyes widening, as he fell in and the doorway vanishing. Looking quickly at Iswell and Micrax, she noticed similar doorways had opened. "Iswell!" Kei-chan ran, noticing the doorway. "No!" They fell through together, the doorway vanishing after them. Micrax's Pecco's eyes were closed and crouched against the wind. Micrax, after losing grip on the reins, flew towards the remaining doorway. Chibi stood and took a hold of his hand as he flew past her. He held on tightly, his eyes willing her to hold tightly to her sword. The ground where her sword was planted began to crack. Loki smiled and came forward, taking a hold of Chibi's sword. "I'll be glad to be rid of you, too." He pulled it free and let go. Chibi and Micrax fell through the last remaining doorway. A golden rope snaked over Loki's head and wrapped around him tightly. "No!" Forseti and Thor bound him. "You focus too much on tormenting humans that you forgot us." Forseti sealed him in an icy cocoon and disappeared along with Thor. Lack sat up. The sound of water rolling under the jetty sounded in his ears. "You all right, Master Lack?" He looked up to see Chibi's leaf. "I was worried you wouldn't answer my call." Lack held his head and looked around. "Where are we? And how are you still with me?" Flight sat next to him and cast heal. "As far as I can tell, we're on Nameless Island. I can't sense my mistress anywhere near at this moment, so I don't think she's on this island. I don't sense anyone near here, actually. My mistress knew about this, and told me to stay with you. Lax sighed and stood up. I guess that means I won't be able to find a warper assigned to here. His head hurt from landing hard. This is what she was talking about? Does she have premonition power like Trey? Lack and Flight walked up the jetty to the houses. Let's look around first to see if we can find a way back. Iswal awoke to find Kei-chan laying over him. He looked around. The roar of the sea crashing below against the cliff could be heard. Many empty houses dotted the land in front of him. Kei-chan groaned and sat up. You all right, Izzy? She asked, holding her head where it had come into contact with his armor. Iswal gave her a kiss on the forehead and smiled. Kei-chan squeezed her eyes shut and forced the pain away. The sound of movement caught their ears. Iswal held his poleaxe in front of him, and together they crept towards the noise. Where are we? Microrex asked, looking around. Chibi placed a hand into the fountain and picked up some water, letting it drain through her fingers. Chibi? Nameless Island, Chibi replied, looking around the area. In the town central square, if I'm not mistaken. She drew her sword and motioned to Microrex to follow her. Someone's coming, he said, holding tightly onto his poleaxe and leaning against the building next to her. Chibi stepped out and pointed her sword at the person's throat. The person took a hold of her sword's blade and smiled. Microrex lowered his poleaxe and let out a sigh. Lack, don't scare us like that. Chibi kept her sword at his throat. You're not Lack. Microrex jerked slightly at the tone of her voice. Lack has my homunculus with him. You don't have her with you. Reveal yourself to me now. Lack smiled, his hand holding her sword, pulling her close. I am Lack. He held her tightly, forcing her to drop her sword. Microrex, uncertain what to do, held his poleaxe in guard position. Lack took a hold of Chibi's left wrist and squeezed tightly. Chibi struggled against him and cried out as the bones cracked under his strength. Microrex pulled Chibi away and held his poleaxe at Lack's chest. You aren't Lack, he said, keeping Chibi close to him. He wouldn't hurt her without reason. Lack pulled his gloves tight and settled into an offensive stance. Microrex set Chibi down and placed both hands on his poleaxe, settling into a guard position. Iswal and Kei-chan approached the noise. Before them, Lack and Microrex were fighting aggressively. Behind Microrex, Chibi sat holding her left wrist close to her chest. Iswal gave Kei-chan a nod and they came out. Iswal caught Microrex's polearm and Lack's fist, forcing them to stop. Kei-chan walked over to Chibi and silently took her wrist, casting heal. Lack pulled away from Iswal and cast Fury. Microrex settled down into guard position next to Iswal. It's not the real Lack, Microrex explained to him. He broke Chibi's wrist when she challenged his identity. Iswal glanced back at Kei-chan, who confirmed Chibi's broken wrist, then settled into a more offensive stance with his poleaxe. Lack growled and leapt at them. Flight flew next to Lack, looking around everywhere. Master Lack, she said softly, pulling at his clothes. Her eyes were on a blue finger, approaching them. Lack turned and looked. She's not real. My connection to my mistress tells me this person isn't her. Lack pulled his gloves tight as the blue figure points her sword at him. Who are you? He asked the figure. I am Chibi, she replied, settling into guard position. It smiled and slashed its sword at him. You have no chance of defeating me, Lack.
Mike, Rex, and Iswal sliced Lack in two, causing him to disappear. I don't feel too good doing that, Iswal said to Mike Rex. They walked back towards K-chan and Chibi. It's like killing one of my friends. It wasn't really him, Mike Rex replied, settling down next to Chibi, who was moving her left hand around, testing it. So it's alright, I guess. But I know what you mean. Chibi picked up her sword with her left hand and dropped it again. I think, Mike Rex said, picking up Chibi's sword and placing it in its sheath on her belt. You should stay as support. You can't carry your sword with your wrist like that. I'm always support, Chibi grumbled, causing K-chan and Iswal to laugh. Even Lack doesn't let me fight when I can. A sure strike! Chibi fell to her knees and disappeared. Lack sat down, feeling a little bad for killing someone who looked like Chibi. Flight pat him on the head and cast heal. If that was really Chibi, she said, perching herself on his shoulder, she wouldn't have attacked you like that. My mistress thinks highly of you, Master Lack. That's nice to know, Lack said with a sigh. But still, it doesn't feel very good to kill someone that I want to protect. He winked at Flight. My mistress doesn't cause trouble intentionally for you, Flight replied, pointing towards a very large building. It just follows her, as it follows you. It's what a high seat is all about. I feel my connection to her flowing that way. All right then. Lack got up and followed Flight's direction. I hope everyone at Loki's castle are all right. And that's it. Trying to read an old story is just difficult. Very difficult. Because a lot of the words just kind of stumble over each other and some of them make no sense. Anyway. I don't know if you could hear that clicking in the background, but I am uploading at the moment Gaian Escapades. So I've got a few uploading to schedule. But yeah. Like, comment, subscribe if you enjoy this story or any other stories. Yeah, because I would love for people to give me like ideas, suggestions, anything really. I'm also planning, and I'll mention this now because I have mentioned it on the Discord already. And if you want to join the Discord, the link to
Discord, I think, is in the description. If not, a link to my link tree, which has the Discord link, is in the description. It's one of the two. I'm pretty sure the Discord link is in the description. But anyway, I have mentioned it, but in March, I'm going to start making, instead of like doing blocks of writing, blocks of games, blocks of whatever, I'm actually going to set up a weekly schedule. So each day is going to have a certain type of video that comes out. So it's a bit more, I wouldn't say streamlined, but more varied, like a variety. So we're not having huge blocks of different things coming out. Yeah. So I'll see you in the next video. And as always, let your imagination grow wild. Bye for now.